A few years ago, I lived in Japan for about 10 months. It was part of a study abroad program for my university's placement year. I stayed in Hiroshima, and most of the Japanese people I met were very kind and polite. But there was one old lady who lived in the apartment next to mine who was different. Around a month after arriving in Japan, my group decided to go to the sake festival. This festival is all about drinking sake, which is a popular Japanese alcoholic beverage. It turns out that everyone goes there to drink a lot and have a good time. So we tried many different types of sake from various places in Japan and ended up getting very drunk. Then somehow we managed to take the train back to our apartments. I can't remember much, except that I called my girlfriend and then fell asleep on my futon, which is a Japanese-style bed. Skipped to 6 in the morning the next day, when I suddenly wake up by a really loud doorbell. I'm confused because it's so early, but I think it might be my friend from downstairs wanting to talk about what happened the night before. I peek through the small hole in my door and see a police officer standing there. I talked to the police using a translation app, and he said there was a complaint about noise. I was surprised because all I did was make a phone call and go to sleep last night. But when they saw I was confused, then they realized there might be a mistake, so they left. I was still feeling drunk and very confused, but the day went on as usual. The next morning at 6 a.m., the doorbell rang again. I already guessed what it might be this time, and when I looked through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers. We had the same conversation and I told them there had been no noise. Then I took them into my apartment to show them how I fell asleep while watching Netflix. That's when they told me. It was the neighbor living next door. Someone I hadn't met who was making the complaints. At this point, I thought maybe she was just being unkind or prejudiced. So I talked to the person at my university who looks after international students. He said they were moving me to a different apartment, one on the floor below. I was pretty upset because I had just started to feel comfortable in my new place, but I had to go along with it. He planned to come the next morning with the landlord to move my stuff and check my new room. Have you ever been woken up in the middle of the night and it really messes with your day? Well, I went to bed on time that night and got ready for the people who were coming to help me move my things. But suddenly around 3 a.m., my doorbell started ringing continuously. It was so loud that it woke me up right away. Now I was really scared. I couldn't even move, and I didn't want to. Everything suddenly became quiet. I slowly walked over to the front door and looked through the peephole, but I didn't see anything. I was sure it was my neighbor who was being really weird. Nothing else happened for the rest of that night, and I eventually went back to sleep. I woke up the next morning still feeling a bit scared. But it's okay, because my friends are coming over soon. I kept going out to check if they were downstairs, but I made sure to close my door quickly because I didn't know what this woman might do if she saw me. When I went into my room, I noticed that the sliding door to my balcony was wide open, and that's when I saw her for the first time. This woman had twisted her body around the fence that separated our balconies, but she was still on her side, and she was just staring right at me. We looked at each other for a moment, and then she quickly turned back to her side. Literally, 2 seconds later, my doorbell rang. Thankfully, it turned out to be the folks who were there to help with my move. I explained the situation to them quickly and hurried downstairs to my new room. At one point, I spotted the lady again acting strangely outside. She was pointing to my new room and asking the police if they had gone there, but luckily after that, I managed to stay away from her. I guess the police decided to stop responding to her calls. It was the summer of 2016, and I had recently gotten married, so we moved to a nice neighborhood and lived in a townhouse. Everything was going well. After a few months, I found out that I was going to have a baby. My husband and I were very happy, and so were our families. Now here's the important part of the story. My mom and dad lived in a townhouse right next to ours, and my grandparents lived in one between mine and my parents. We all loved the place, and the townhouses were really nice. so we decided to live in the same place to stay close to each other. My husband enjoyed going fishing at a local fishing competition that our town hosted every weekend. But the fishing tournament would finish really late, and I used to just stay at home most of the time. There were a couple of reasons for that. First, I felt sick a lot and was nauseous all the time. Second, I couldn't stand the smell, especially being pregnant. So since I didn't have much else to do, I would go outside to get some fresh air and spend time with my mom and grandparents in the evenings. And that's when everything began. I started to notice that my neighbor was acting very strangely. He lived in the last townhouse at the very end of the complex. So my creepy neighbor would drive into the complex and park his car in a way that gave him a clear view of me and my family when we were sitting outside in the evenings. Then he would simply go and check his mail. After checking his mail, he would just sit there for a long time, sometimes 30 minutes to an hour, just looking at us while we sat on my Nana's porch. But I think he was only looking at me, because I could barely see his face, and his eyes were locked onto mine. His face looked so blank, and it really gave me the creeps. He did this every single evening, so when I told my family, they got scared too. One day, I decided to go to the fishing pond with my husband and my dad for the evening. Well, it didn't last too long, to be honest. A few hours later, I started feeling sick, so I had to go back home. I told my husband that if I felt better, I'd come back later. He agreed and told me to go home and rest. So I went back home and watched a movie or two. By the time it was time to pick up my husband, as I was feeling a bit better, I had dropped him off earlier in the evening, so I grabbed my keys and headed across town to pick him up. We were on our way home and approaching a red traffic light when I noticed a car coming up fast behind my truck. I told my husband to look at the driver because the car was getting dangerously close to the back of our truck, almost touching the bumper. The car was really close to my truck, almost touching it. When the traffic light turned green, I drove off quickly, but I noticed the car just stayed there. I told my husband to look, and right when I said that, the car started moving and its headlights turned off. It was around 2 a.m. at this point. "Oh my goodness, look," I said. My husband replied, "I know, just focus on the road." I glanced in my rearview mirror and the car had turned its lights back on, and the driver was now speeding up to catch up with us with the high beams on. As he got closer, he turned off his headlights again. My husband could tell how scared I was, and I think he was getting a little freaked out too. I finally reached our townhouse complex and pulled in. The car behind me turned on its lights and followed me in. The car stopped when I continued driving to park in my spot. After parking our truck, I looked at my husband, and we both agreed not to get out of the truck. We watched the entrance, and the car began to move slowly down the road. We got a good look at the car, and that's when I realized it was our creepy neighbor. He parked his car and got out, standing on his porch staring at our truck. He went inside his house. My husband and I just looked at each other in shock. I said to my husband, "Who on earth does that?" He shook his head and sighed, and then we went inside. We couldn't believe what had just happened. We both agreed that he was extremely strange and that we should avoid him as much as possible. Another time that really gave me the creeps was when I was at a red traffic light, and this time I was alone in my car. I happened to glance in my rearview mirror when saw the neighbor in the car right behind me. He was so close that he almost bumped into me. When I looked back at him, I noticed he had a really disturbing expression on his face. The feeling I got when I saw him was so terrifying that I can't even put it into words. He had his head down, looking up with both his hands on the steering wheel, and he just seemed really angry, like he was acting strangely. When the traffic light turned green, I started driving and he was still following me closely. So I sped up a bit and he did the same. I was starting to get really worried by this point. I kept thinking, what if he crashes into me? I'm 6 months pregnant and this could harm my baby. He was still tailgating me and he still had that same scary look on his face. It honestly seemed like he wanted to harm me, so I quickly turned on my left turn signal and pulled over to the right. I did that to distract him so I could get away without him following me. But when I pulled off the road quickly, he got dangerously close to the back of my truck, nearly causing an accident. I called my husband and explained what had just happened. At that point, I was really shaken up. I managed to calm down and went back home. As I entered our complex, I saw him at the mailbox, checking his mail. I parked the truck, and then I called my mom, asking her to come down. I told her everything that had just happened. Then I quickly got out of my car and went into my house, making sure everything was locked and secure. My sister, who's like the family detective, started looking into this more. We soon found out that he was a convicted murderer who had done something terrible. This guy had killed his partner and stayed with the dead body for days. Then he had plans to get rid of the body, but luckily he got caught before he could. He tried to argue that he was insane. They didn't buy it, and he ended up in prison. He served his time but was released a few years earlier than he should have been. Once I found out about his past, I became very paranoid, so I made sure to lock all the doors and windows to feel safe. I also carried a legal gun with me wherever I went. I was scared of him, and I had every reason to be. A couple of months passed, and one day when my dad and husband were working on the truck, my mom, my newborn baby, and I were sitting on the porch trying to enjoy the evening, when we noticed his car pulling into the complex and he was playing the song "I've Had the Time of My Life" from the movie Dirty Dancing really loudly. He was driving slowly down the road, just like before. He parked his car in his spot, then backed up to get a clear view of me and my mom. He turned his car all the way around to stare at us, with the song still blasting. My mom and I told my husband and dad to go check on what he was doing. They had enough of his weird behavior. They said they were going to ask him why he was staring at us. When he saw them walking toward his car, he quickly sped off down the alleyway. I doubt I'll ever be able to listen to that song again without thinking of that guy. Thanks for ruining it for me. But luckily he moved out not long after that, and I couldn't have been happier. So finally, I could feel safe in my own home again. Sometimes I see him in town, and it instantly reminds me of how scared he used to make me feel. I met this guy while I was still with my boyfriend, but despite being 10 years older than me, if I recall correctly, he wasn't someone I found attractive. We only had about 20 minutes of conversation, and it was all very impersonal and polite exchanges. I only talked to him when it was absolutely necessary. It was just basic talk, nothing more. While my boyfriend and I started dating, and somehow that other guy knew about it. When we were excited to go to the club together, we noticed that this guy was following us. It made me nervous, and I started freaking out. I ran to the bathroom with my friend for safety, while our boyfriend turned around to talk to him. That guy, however, started acting really immature, like a 5-year-old boy. He even started crying and then ran away, leaving the nightclub. Then about a month later, I found a disturbing love letter in my mailbox. It was creepy because he had delivered it himself to my house, meaning that this guy had followed me to my door before and found out where I live. Fast forward 1 year, and I don't go to the place I met him anymore because he practically lives there. My friends told me he hangs out there every day, almost like he's waiting for me to show up. We moved after a while, and during that summer at the new place, I started noticing that guy at the mall. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, but then a shop owner I know well tells me that the guy's been following me and even hides when I turn around. That really worried me. So I shared the whole story with the shop owner. He was concerned too and promised to let other store owners know about the situation. He also assured me that he would call security the next time if he sees that creepy guy following me. I now have my own first professional-level full-time stalker, and my boyfriend and I were clueless about what to do. My family was just as lost, and we were super worried. The police couldn't do much since this guy wasn't doing anything harmful at the time. It's been well over 2 years, and things are tough. I don't want to work as a waitress even though I really need the money, because I know he would find out where I work and then sit there all day and night just watching me. I try not to work anywhere near the place I first met this guy, especially around the city center. Going to the mall alone is a no-go for me now. I always bring my boyfriend along. There are specific supermarkets and cafes I steer clear of because I know he hangs out there hoping to see me. It's disturbing because I don't even know his last name, but he has a strange control over where I can go or not. I really wish I could leave the city, but it's not easy, even if I manage to go somewhere else. He knows both my first and last name, and all I know about him is his first name and what he looks like. It's kind of scary because he could find me easily. The situation might get even riskier once I finish university. I'm aiming for a teaching position and they put all your information on the internet. So it makes me worry about my safety and what he might do. They have to do it so students can see. He might come to my open classes or lectures, sit down and pretend to be a student. But I really hope that never happens. Female. I was 24 years old at that time, and I'm 5 feet 2 inches tall. I can confidently say that I look attractive. I'm grateful for it, but sometimes it's not easy. My natural red hair is a very special shade, and I have a naturally thin waist with curves in the right places. So it's very common for men and even women to approach me. I'm a kind and friendly person. I appreciate those who give compliments and then go on their way. Or those who try to start a romantic conversation, even if I'm not interested, and they take it gracefully. However, there are some people who don't understand when I'm not interested, and they keep bothering me. Unfortunately, this kind of thing happened quite often. But this man, the one I'm going to talk about, took it to another level. I had recently come out of a really bad relationship and had moved back in with my parents because I didn't have my own room. So I had slept on the couch downstairs. The story really starts on the very first night. It was a nice, cool evening. The sun was just starting to go down, and the Arizona sky was filled with pink and orange colors. I was taking both of my dogs to the park up the road. I lived in a neighborhood that was part of a much bigger neighborhood. There was one long, winding road that went from the entrance to the back, where we were. My parents' house was only 2 houses away, just across a road. I walked to the left, going to the other side of the park using the path that goes around it. There was a big open area where I let my dogs run around freely for a while. After about 10 minutes, I called them over and put their leashes back on. Then, I continued on the path. I passed the play areas and tables in the middle of the park. Beyond that, there was a smaller open area. Finally, I headed towards the basketball courts, almost completing my walk. When I reached the basketball courts, I saw there was a man watching 2 young kids playing basketball. The kids looked to be about 6 or 8 years old, and the man was probably in his 40s. He wasn't heavy, but he had a strong build and was probably around 6 feet tall. But as I got closer, one of the kids asked if they could pet my dog. I told him it was okay to pet the pit bull, Pluto. But my miniature schnauzer didn't like kids and stayed close to me, but not getting too close. Pluto, on the other hand, was thrilled to receive all the pets. He wagged his tail and had that friendly pit bull grin on his face. The kids were showering Pluto with affection, and then the man started a casual conversation with me. I'm always very polite, so I replied to everything he said, as it was just the usual chit-chat. "It's nice out here, isn't it?" he said. "Yeah, we've been here for a while. How about you?" Then he asked if I lived nearby, which I didn't find strange. So I nodded toward where I live and said, "Yeah, just up the road." He seemed happy and said, "Oh, really? Same. We live just down there," pointing down the same road. His kid chimed in saying, "We aren't that close, Dad." At the time, I didn't think much of it, but looking back, it was definitely a warning sign. However, in that moment, I thought the kid just saw a short walk as a big deal. After all, they have little legs and minds that jump from one thing to another. We both had a little laugh about it and moved on. I told him I needed to go back to give my dog some water. The older boy, who hadn't spoken much, had already gone back to play basketball. The kid, who was clearly the man's son, stayed with me. His dad said, "Yeah, we're heading that way too, so I'll walk with you." I didn't really want him to, but it's a neighborhood, and I couldn't just say no to someone wanting to walk with me, right? Even though some people might do that, I'm not rude like that.
It's a bit odd because I have a strong and independent personality. I'm a girly girl who loves being pampered. But if you let me take charge, I can't resist. I need a man who knows when to say no to me and bring me back to reality at times. But when it comes to strangers bothering me or guys hitting on me, I tend to be polite for too long. As we walked, the other kid stayed behind, and it was clear he wasn't the man's son, but just a neighborhood kid the other boy had been playing with. So it was just the dad and the kid walking with me as I cut through the basketball courts, went through the rocks, and reached the sidewalk before crossing the road. It was during this walk that the guy started asking more and more questions. He asked, "It's just you and your husband?" I replied, "No, I'm not married." Then he asked, "Oh, who do you live with?" I said I just ended a relationship, so I'm staying on my parents' couch for now. He replied, "That's nice. What do they do for work?" I didn't want to share too much, so my answers were brief. He then asked if they had long working hours during the day. Now at this point, the questions were getting too personal.
So I started giving shorter answers, trying not to reveal too much. But I did mention that my dad worked from home, which was true, and that he was hardly ever away. I was relieved that our house was just 2 houses away. When we reached the edge of the second house, I stopped. My miniature schnauzer named Walter was still close to me, was cautious around the stranger. I told him that Walter is usually well behaved in public, but he can get aggressive on our property or in my car. When we step into my yard, he might growl or snap, so it's better to be safe, I explained honestly. The man seemed to understand and said, "No problem. Have a good night." I replied the same and walked up to my yard. I went up the path, unclipped the dog's leashes near the front door and unlocked it. Then I headed inside, making sure to lock the door behind me. As I went to check if the dogs had water, I heard Walter snarling, which was unusual. He usually didn't do that without a reason, not even if someone was passing by on the sidewalk. So I peeked out of the blinds in my living room window when I saw the man and the kid were walking back to the park. I noticed there was only one car at the park, and apart from the very young boy playing basketball, there was no one else around. It seems strange to need a car if you live nearby and say you're walking home only to return to the park, but there was nothing I could do, so I moved on. The very next night I was waiting for a grooming appointment, as I run my own grooming business from home. I still had about 40 minutes before the appointment, and I was doing some online work when I heard the doorbell ring. I thought my client had arrived early, which happens sometimes, so I went to the door to let them know I'd put my dogs away and be right back. However, when I opened the door, it wasn't my client, it was that man. He asked me, "Hey, what are you doing?" with a lot of excitement. I replied a bit awkwardly saying, "Oh, hey, not much. What's up?" He said, "I'm heading to the park and I thought you could come too." But then he quickly added, "But why don't you leave the dogs behind this time?" That was weird, but I couldn't and wouldn't leave my dogs behind. So I explained that I had a client coming any minute. He seemed disappointed, but said okay and left. The next night I got another knock at around the same time. It was dark outside, and I had forgotten to turn on the porch light. So I opened the door and turned on the light at the same time. Guess who? It definitely wasn't Santa. And once again, he asked me to come to the park, insisting that I leave my dogs at home. I told him I couldn't go with him, even though I had no plans, and could have if I wanted to. I was polite, but kept my answers short to show I wasn't interested. After all, he was old enough to be my dad. He asked, "When can you come then?" I explained that I'm self-employed, and I take appointments on the same day, even last-minute ones for animal rescues. I mentioned that I work as an in-home groomer, so my schedule can be pretty crazy, and I don't always know when I'll be available. He said, "Oh, okay, I understand." He seemed disappointed, and then said, "Maybe in a few days then?" I replied, "Yeah, maybe. It's uncertain," with an uncomfortable smile, hoping he would get the message to leave me alone. On the third night he came by, which was the 4th time since we first met. I didn't answer the door this time. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was around the same time, so I knew it was him.
Luckily, I wasn't in the living room this time, so the TV was off, and it would have looked dark inside from the front of the house. He rang the doorbell again, but I just let my dogs keep barking, making it seem like no one was home. Eventually, he left. I had told my dad as he was about to go downstairs that it was a friend I didn't want to see, and that he would leave on his own shortly. My dad didn't really care, so he just shrugged and went back to his office. It was now the 5th day since I first met the man, and that night, there were no knocks on the door. I didn't think about it at the time. I went about my day and later settled under the couch to sleep. But at some point during the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure what had woken me up. It was really dark, except for the occasional blue light blinking from a computer connected to the TV under the TV stand. As the light blinked and lightly lit up the room, I noticed my pit bull, Pluto, standing right in front of me. Pluto got all stiff, and he was staring at something behind my head near the kitchen doorway. I heard him growling, and it made me jump up and look behind me. I was terrified to see a man there.
About 6 feet tall and with a strong body. It was too dark to see his features, but as he stood there without moving, I gasped. This seemed to trigger Pluto, and he got the message that this guy wasn't supposed to be there. He lunged at the man, who spun around really quickly. I grabbed my gun from the coffee table. It took a moment because my hand was shaking a bit, and the darkness made everything on the table look like random black shapes. I had the gun in my hand, and I got it ready. I hurried into the kitchen where both my dogs and the man had gone. The doggy door that could be put in and out of the sliding glass door was completely torn apart. It had collapsed and broken. The sliding door was barely open, so the man must have jumped through it. I rushed into the backyard, worried that the gate might be open. My dogs usually don't run away, but when chasing an intruder, you never know how far they'd go. So without shoes, I hurried through the rocks, which was painful, but the gate was closed and locked. The man must have jumped over the wall. Pluto was near the gate, looking through the wood as best as he could, his body tense and alert. Walter pacing back and forth along the wall. I called them over, and then we went back inside. I removed the broken doggy door and shut the sliding door tightly. I locked it and also checked the windows. I should have called the police, but at the time I didn't think I had much information to give them. Looking back, that was a big mistake, and I should have reported it. No matter how little information you have, it's important to report such incidents. What if the person is known to the police? What if they try it again, and your report helps them get a longer sentence because it shows they tried it before? And what if he targets someone else? What if reporting it can prevent that? Always do the right thing and report such incidents. It might save a life. I'll never know what he had in mind for me, but I can make some guesses, and none of them are good. I can't prove it was the same man from the basketball courts, but who else could it be? I'm just relieved he never came back after that. I do regret not calling the police, as they could have checked for fingerprints, but being someone who likes to handle things herself, I didn't call, which was a mistake. Many years have passed, and I've learned from that experience. Now, I'm extra cautious. I make sure all the windows are locked, and every night I double-check that all the doors are locked too. I keep my gun on my bedside table with nothing else near it. I've also learned how to firmly and clearly shut people down. Stay safe out there, everyone. You can say no and end a conversation without being rude, so don't be afraid to do that. Over about 8 years, there were some times when people tried to break into our house. It didn't happen all the time, but it did occur around 5 times. Surprisingly, one of the attempted break-ins was by one of our neighbors. To give you some background, we live in Tucson, Arizona, in an eastern neighborhood close to the Air Force Base. We moved here in 2009 when I was finishing 5th grade. Our house wasn't in the best condition, but we had no other choice. All right, it was my time to go out with my kids for Halloween. Last year, my wife did it, and we switch every year. My son is 7, and my daughter is 9, and they were super excited, all dressed up in their cool costumes. I usually stay on the street, keeping an eye on them while they run from house to house for candy. After about 30 minutes of walking, we reached a really good spot for getting lots of candy, a busy street in our neighborhood. There were so many cool decorations and things in people's front yards. So I got a little distracted, and I wasn't paying close attention to my kids. Then a few minutes later, they came back from a house with another girl who was about the same height as my daughter. But the interesting thing was, she had this really weird homemade mask on. It looked like it was made from some kind of cardboard or similar material. Then my daughter asked if her new friend could come along for trick or treating. I said of course. So we all went together as a group. I didn't know much about the girl, but I guess she might be a friend from school or somewhere. As we walked, I noticed a really tall man following us. He was big, and I started to feel a bit uneasy. I couldn't figure out if he was just enjoying the decorations too, or if something else was going on. He had this mask that looked like an angry cat, which kind of gave me the shivers. Then I thought he might be the girl's dad, so I tried to start a little conversation with him. I said something like, nice weather, huh? But he didn't reply. He just stood there, staring at me with that creepy cat mask, while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he's just not a talkative person. I asked again, saying, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He just nodded, but he still didn't say anything. I thought maybe he's just not into talking, so I stopped trying to chat with him. We kept going for about 15 more minutes, going to different houses and collecting more candy. Then my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me because we hadn't been out for too long and their bags were only about a third full. Anyway, I said okay. We waved goodbye to the man with the cat mask and his daughter, then started going home. But the strange part was when I looked back at them. They were just standing there, staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not moving at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, so, who was that girl? My daughter looked up at me with a really confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied, looking pretty confused too. I was puzzled because I didn't recognize the girl, and it seemed odd that my daughter thought she was my friend. I asked her what she meant by that. Turns out the girl with the cardboard mask had come up to my kids. She told my daughter that she was a friend of mine, and explained that she was too shy to ask me directly if she could join us for trick-or-treating. So she hoped my daughter could ask me on her behalf. I didn't know the girl, but it seemed like a misunderstanding. Maybe she thought she knew me, or got confused. Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any friends who are kids. What my daughter said next truly surprised me and sent a chill down my spine. She explained that when the girl with the cardboard mask first came up to them, she wasn't even wearing the mask. So they saw her face, and it wasn't someone familiar. I couldn't understand why the girl would say she was my friend if we didn't even recognize each other. Later we found out that she wasn't a girl at all. She was actually an older woman about my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing is that this older woman had been quietly taking treats from my daughter's bag when I wasn't looking. That's why they wanted to go home, because they noticed the woman taking their candies. I brought my kids home and explained everything to my wife. We checked through all their candy, looking closely, but we didn't find anything suspicious or strange. We didn't call the police or anything because, well, nothing really bad happened. But now thinking about it, I kind of wish we had made a different choice. It's really weird that some people on Halloween wear masks to pretend to be kids. "3 years back, my wife and I bought our first house in the fancy part of the city. And we picked a place near my mom's house since she's been on her own since my dad passed away. My mom was born in South Africa before there was a vaccine for polio, and she got affected by the disease. She can't move her legs, so she has been using crutches or a wheelchair all her life. My wife and I really wanted a house near hers so that we could visit her a lot and take care of her. We also wanted to make sure she can be independent and do her own stuff without feeling like we're always watching her. I always worried about something happening to my mom, so it made me feel better knowing I could quickly go to her place to help, no matter if it was a small issue or a big problem. But one summer night in 2019, something bad happened, which I wasn't ready for. In the middle of the summer, I drove my mom to the airport, as she was going to South Africa to see her sister and my cousins. Because my older brother lives in another city, and I'm close by, I took on the job of looking after her house while she was away. So I made sure to visit twice a week. It became my routine to water the plants, pick up the mail, check the answering machine, and do all the usual things that need doing in a house. I wanted to make sure everything was in order for when she came back home. Thankfully, a year ago, I got a security system for my mom's house. It's like having a helper that keeps an eye on things, even when I'm not there. I set it up so I can use my phone to see what's happening at her place anytime. If a window or door is opened, or if something sets off the alarm, my phone lets me know immediately. I made sure to put everything in for security except cameras. And later in the story, I'd regret not having them. But in my own house, I have cameras everywhere, inside and outside. They watch over everything, from my motorcycle in the garage to my snoozing dog in the living room. Fast forward a month. I finished work, hit the gym, watched a movie with my wife, and got ready for bed. Nothing unusual so far, right? But just after 2 in the morning, my phone started making a noise. I thought it might be an email or something from Instagram, so I ignored it. I really value my sleep as I usually get around 5 hours a night. After I started dozing off, my phone kept making noise again and again. My wife woke up and said, "Turn it off. I'm trying to sleep." She often teased me about keeping the volume on at night, but I do it just in case of an emergency or if my mom needs us. I'm glad I didn't turn the volume off, because when I tried to check the notifications, it hit me suddenly, like a car crashing through my living room. I got a bunch of messages from the security system at my mom's house. Right then, the company watching the system calls my phone, and I pick up. The lady on the phone tells me that the home alarm is going off because the motion detector in the basement noticed movement several times. Then she says they've sent security people to check on my mom's house to make sure everything's okay. While I was on the phone with the lady, I checked the message again from the security system. I could see what she was telling me. I also looked at the locks on my mom's doors, and the system said they were all locked. Without looking more, I suddenly understood. Someone or something is inside the house right now. Remember, I was suddenly woken up from sleep and told that maybe someone broke into my mother's house. I was still half asleep, and I didn't have time to clear the fog in my mind. Because of that, I jumped to the wrong conclusion, and I thought my mother could be in danger. I quickly got out of bed and ran to the garage. I only paused to put on my shoes and grab my car keys. It was good I had pajama pants on because it was a cold night. I didn't stop to pick up a shirt, jacket, or any kind of weapon. I was in a hurry to reach my mother's place, like the ones the police use, which I usually bring for exploring around the city. So I grabbed the flashlight, placed it on my lap, started the car, and pushed the gas pedal down fast. I went way faster than the speed limit in the neighborhood to get to the house in a hurry. Trying to drive like a racer really wakes you up. When I reached my mom's house, I saw that all the lights were still off, exactly how I had left them. The alarm was so loud that it hurt my ears. People from nearby houses started coming outside, but there were no security patrol cars in sight. I ran to the front door while unlocking it from my phone. But when I yanked the door open, I found myself staring into the dark entryway of my mother's house. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I couldn't move. I was frozen with fear. I had never faced anything so frightening before. I've been through some pretty intense and crazy stuff before, even situations where my life was at risk. But nothing scared me as much as looking into what I was sure was the entrance to really scary things that happened in my childhood home. Just to note, at this moment, while standing at the door, my brain still hadn't reminded me that my mom was safe, chilling at my aunt's beach house in South Africa. With the thought of my mom in my head, my bravery kicked in. Step by step, I went into the house. I think my body's fight or flight switch got stuck on fight because I went searching instead of checking my mom's room. I literally hit the switch that turns on the lights in the basement, ready for a big fight. But you know what? To this day, I'm not sure if it was a huge relief or if I was terrified. Because when I looked around, there was absolutely nothing there. Not a single thing. I looked around where I was standing. The windows in the main part of the basement were fine. The lights from the motion detector were blinking, and my phone was buzzing to tell me about my own movements in the house. Then I realized standing out in the open in the basement wasn't a smart thing to do. So I ran back upstairs, turning on all the lights in the kitchen as I went. I grabbed the biggest knife from the block. Then I went to my mother's room. I checked every corner, doorway, closet, and even under each piece of furniture. I did it slowly and carefully, making sure everything was okay, until I felt sure the main floor of the house was safe. I was sure the person who shouldn't be there must be in the basement. I took out my phone and turned off the home alarm so I could listen carefully. Then I checked the main room again, under the pool table, behind the couch, and even in the bathroom, but found nothing. But as I turned to go down the hallway, I saw the door to the guest bedroom was closed. I couldn't remember if I had closed it before or during another visit, so I walked up to the door slowly, trying my best to hear any sound. I grabbed the door handle and pulled it open. I can't be sure, but I might have gotten really scared. When I saw someone at the other end of the room with a big knife, I had to try my hardest not to faint. I was really scared, but I knew I had to do something. I gathered my courage bit by bit and reached for the light switch, ready to fight the intruder. The light came on, and I dropped to my knees, crying. That's when I realized I was looking at my own reflection. The closet door in the bedroom had mirrored panels, and in the dark, they made me see something that looked like a scary person. Then I heard a car door close outside, and I thought it was the security patrol arriving in the driveway. The guy who claimed to be a security officer was standing there, but he looked younger than me. If you imagine the word intimidating in your mind, this man was the opposite. He was a bit chubby, smiling, and had a really young-looking face. He looked more like someone welcoming you into a house. I checked my watch, and the man had come a whole hour after I told the security company to send someone. I told the guy that I searched every part of the house and didn't find anything. I started to wonder not-so-nice thoughts about how useless this guy, pretending to be a security officer. But I'm a bit embarrassed about those thoughts now. He asked me if I checked the garage. My clever grin disappeared quickly. I reached for the button in my car that opens the garage door. The garage is an open space, and it's really hard to hide in there. I walked through, peeked inside the car, and then left the garage. I felt sure it was empty. The security officer gave me some papers to sign. Basically, it said he did come when the home alarm went off. I told him about the basement motion detector, showing lots of times where it recorded movement. Then I saw his face go pale, as he explained that the detectors his company uses don't just sense movement, but also check for changes in temperature in the room to avoid false reports of movement. After telling me this, he got into his car and drove away. I locked up the house, turned on the outside lights, and set the security system again. I leaned against my car, looking at the house, trying to figure out how the alarm could have gone off. It's supposed to work when it senses movement and heat, but there didn't seem to be anyone around. The very next day, I made sure to get security cameras installed outside the house, in the garage, and where the motion detectors were placed. It's been 2 years since that night, and I haven't shared this incident with my mom, brother, or my wife. I'm still puzzled. Was there really someone there?
Or was there some weird reason for the alarm going off? I really hope I never have to experience that again. Sometimes not knowing the answer is the better choice.
I'm a 16-year-old guy, but last year I had a bad accident, which almost killed me. Since then, I sometimes have chest pain and trouble breathing for no reason. My arms and legs also shake on their own sometimes. I live in the countryside on a big property with lots of bushes and trees. I'm really cautious and don't trust strangers. One night it was 1:30 in the morning and I was watching a movie on the couch while my parents were sleeping. My sister was out of town having fun. Suddenly I saw a bright light outside that turned on because it sensed motion. The windows were closed, but the light was so strong that it shined through the gaps in the window blinds. Then I heard the back door making noise. I thought it was my sister returning from her night out, but she didn't come in for another 20 minutes. I asked her why she stayed outside for so long, and she said she had just gotten home. I thought it was probably the strong wind because there was a big storm that night. My sister and I went to bed in separate rooms. The next night at 1:15 a.m., I was in the kitchen making a sandwich, which is connected to the garage. I should mention that my dog and cat sleep in the garage. But suddenly, my dog started barking loudly and acting crazy for no apparent reason. I thought my dog was barking at the cat, but when he didn't stop after a minute, I got worried. I remembered what happened the night before. I'm always anxious, so I went to get a knife because the guns were in the garage. Just as I was about to enter the garage, my dog suddenly stopped barking. I listened at the garage door for a few minutes, but there was no noise. I felt really scared, so I decided to go to bed. I planned to talk to my parents about it the next day, but they didn't take it seriously. Now it's the next night, and it's 1:46 a.m. I was half expecting my dog to start barking again, and I had my knife ready. And just as I thought, it happened. My dog went wild again, barking like crazy. This time I hurried to the garage, and as I got closer, I heard noises inside. I was sure someone was in there. I opened the door quickly, but there was nothing there. I searched the whole garage, but I found nothing. I told my mom about it because my dad was away on a business trip. I suggested we might need to call the police, but she didn't believe me and said I couldn't call them. I went back downstairs thinking maybe I was going crazy, that it was all in my head, and that's when I heard a whistle coming through the window. I rushed to the window and opened the blinds, but there was nothing outside. As I headed towards the garage, I heard a tap and then another whistle at the kitchen window. I quickly opened the blinds and saw that the motion sensor light was on. I went into the garage to get a shotgun, but it was empty. I searched for the bullets but couldn't find any. Then I realized that not only were the shotgun bullets missing, but all the bullets for the rifle, pistol, and revolver were gone too. I heard 3 taps on the garage door next to me, followed by another whistle and a laugh. Fortunately, I knew where my dad had hidden the spare bullets. I got the bullets from the secret stash, which the person didn't find. When I returned to the living room, I heard more taps, whistles, and even laughter at every window. It was happening at the living room window, the kitchen window, the game room window, the garage window, and all over. The person kept tapping, whistling, and sometimes laughing at every window. I rushed out the door with my gun ready. The person had disappeared, or so I thought. When I looked up, I saw a tall, slim figure in a hoodie on the roof. I was about to shoot when I suddenly couldn't breathe due to my health condition. I fell to the cold ground, aiming my gun at the person on the roof, but my body started shaking uncontrollably because of my condition. The person jumped down, and believe it or not, he put his lips right next to my ear and started whistling. I thought I was about to die. Then he walked towards my pool. After a few minutes, I managed to get back on my feet, using my shotgun like a walking aid because my legs were still shaking. I thought the person had left, so I went back inside. My mom believed me. We were about to call the police when we looked out the window, and we actually saw the person's head popping out from our pool. The police came and searched our property. They found all the missing bullets in our shed.
There were muddy footprints all over our property. And to make it even scarier, the words, "Oh no," were carved into the wall. We also found out that he got into the garage by moving a heavy metal plate that blocked a hole to the outside. It was a complete nightmare. The person who was whistling and laughing like a maniac. I dare you to come back so I can finish the job this time.
I was going through my old notebooks and journals with my girlfriend, and that's when I found a journal entry from when I was about 12 years old. It made me remember a time when I used to live in what I thought was a very safe and protected neighborhood. But I wasn't allowed to go too far from home without someone watching me. Because our neighborhood had gates around it, my parents would let me walk around inside those gates, even if they weren't home. One day after school, I was riding my bike around the neighborhood when I saw a middle-aged lady. She was sitting on her porch crying, and her front door was wide open. I got worried and stopped my bike to see what was happening. She told me she was having trouble with her husband and asked me to come inside her house to keep her company while she calmed down. I felt a bit uneasy because I knew it's important to be cautious around people I didn't know, but I also wanted to be a kind and polite person. As a young kid, I felt confused about what to do, so I kept saying no to going inside, and she kept asking, saying, "Please, please, just for a moment. I just need someone to talk to." But I kept refusing, and then she asked me to wait outside with her and stay until she felt better. I agreed to wait because I felt safe in my neighborhood. She asked me to sit on her porch while she went inside her house and brought back a couple of framed pictures. She joined me inside the house while I sat on the porch, just outside the door. Then, she showed me the pictures. One was of a kid who was older than me, wearing the local high school football uniform. The other picture had a man and the same kid in it. She started telling me stories about how she met the man and how they spent their honeymoon in Hawaii. She also talked about how her kid was really good at football, one of the best on the team. But she was really upset because she was afraid that if she and her husband got a divorce, she wouldn't see her kid anymore. She started crying again, and this time she cried on my shoulder. Strangely, knowing she had a child made me feel more at ease around her. She kept talking for a while, and I started feeling a bit awkward. She kept crying on and off on my shoulder, and I didn't know how to react. I kept thinking, what did I get myself into? I just nodded my head, pretending to listen, but I was more worried about finding a good excuse to leave and go home. She kept saying nice things about me, calling me a young and kind boy. She also said, "You don't know how important it is for you to spend time with me." This made me feel a little guilty about leaving her. She kept insisting that she wanted to make me dinner as a thank you if I came inside, but I kept saying no. Finally, I told her I had to leave. She asked if I knew how to use her cell phone because she had just gotten it recently. I said I could help, so I waited. She left for quite a while, and even though part of me wanted to walk away, I didn't want to be rude, especially since she lived so close to my house and might know my parents. I kept feeling really anxious as I thought about leaving, but then I'd convince myself to stay. It was like a roller coaster of emotions. I felt like I couldn't just walk away. After what felt like a super long time, she brought me her phone, and it was an Android. I only had an iPhone 3G at that time, so I was worried I wouldn't know how to use it. I held down the power button for a moment, and it turned on. She then asked if I knew how to check text messages. I found the Messages app and opened it. There was only one phone number, and it wasn't saved as a contact in the app. Then she pointed at the text and said, "Please read me his messages." So I opened it. She had received a bunch of messages that were pretty much the same, just different ways of saying hello and asking for a reply. She was upset and told me to read them to her right away. She really wanted to know what he said. I told her they all say hello with a question mark. She insisted in a strong voice, read them to me. So I started reading the messages. Then she closed her eyes and nodded at times, and she commented things like, "He does miss me. Well, forget him, as he had his chance." Then she quickly changed from being a crying and worried woman to someone who was angry and wanted to prove she was right.
A few times I paused while reading and I asked if she wanted me to stop, but she snapped at me saying, "Keep reading," so I kept on reading.
It felt like her husband was acting kind of crazy with so many similar messages. I scrolled through and read many messages that looked almost the same, going back for days. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I was involved in something I shouldn't be part of. I really wanted to go home, but every time I stopped, she got really angry and told me to keep reading. Then I found a message that was different from all the others. It said, "As I've already told the police, and I have a restraining order. If you come near my family, you'll be arrested." I felt really worried when I read that. It made me realize that all the messages I'd been reading were from her phone. I stopped and couldn't believe it, but she insisted, "Keep reading." I told her I couldn't because it was getting very late and my parents were expecting me for dinner. "Why don't you come in for dinner? I'll make you something. You can tell them later that you were helping your neighbor. They won't be upset, I promise." But this time she was both angry and really worried. So I explained that my parents would get concerned and wonder why I was gone for so long. She begged me a few more times not to leave, and she started crying as I got up. Honestly, I felt bad about it back then. I rode my bike home as fast as I could. When I got home, my parents had just come back from work, and they asked me where I'd been. But I didn't tell them the truth, as I was a little scared that they might not let me go around the neighborhood when they weren't home. A few days later, when I came home, I saw there were 3 police cars parked in front of her house. It felt really worried when I saw the police cars, so that night I asked my parents if they knew what had happened. My dad just said, "Oh, there was a break-in or something." Later, I asked one of our neighbors if they knew more about it. That another neighbor had let a homeless woman into their home. They offered her a shower, a place to stay, new clothes, and a phone. They were even trying to help her find a job. But it turned out she had a mental illness, and she started having strange beliefs like thinking the neighbor's kid was her own. Eventually, the neighbor kicked her out. After she was kicked out, she started bothering him a lot. So he went to his parents' house and sent his kid to stay with his ex-wife because he was worried about their safety. He had good reasons to be worried because not long after he left, she broke one of the windows to get into the house. Then she stayed in the house for nearly a week before a neighbor noticed the broken window and called the police. By the time they arrived, she had wrecked the whole house. She got arrested. I had a hard time believing it, but I checked behind the house and saw the broken window myself. I think the guy probably ended his lease and moved out right away because he was scared she might come back after getting out of jail. I'm not sure if she ever tried to come back, but I really hope they told the new tenants about what happened. To this day, I still feel uneasy about it. Who knows what could have happened if I had gone into that house. 22-year-old French student currently pursuing my master's degree in Amsterdam. In a student-only building. The neighborhood is calm and nice, with the occasional sounds of trams passing by, or the distant noise of parties in other student buildings. But one night, it was around 10 o'clock, when I heard a knock on my apartment door. I live on the 3rd floor, and to reach my front door, you have to use a key to open the main entrance, and then another key to open the door to my hallway. This means that only people with a key can come in. If someone wants to visit, they can give me a call or ring my doorbell, and I'll open the door for them. It adds an extra layer of security to our building, ensuring that only authorized people can access our floors. On a regular day when I heard someone knocking on my door, I usually open the door without much thought, whether it's my landlord checking in or a neighbor asking for something. As I've mentioned, I generally feel safe in my building, and I can take care of myself if needed. At this time, for some reason, I had an uneasy feeling. It's not that I felt in immediate danger, but something felt off. At first, I didn't do anything, as I figured the person would go away. I had just finished my assignment and wanted some peace. But the knocking didn't stop. I stayed put, thinking they'd leave soon. and I could finally relax after my hard work. The knocking continued for a good 30 seconds, so I decided to speak up and said hello. The voice replied in English, saying, "It's Uber Eats." It seemed strange because most people here usually speak Dutch, and I recognized the voices of those who live on my floor. But it wasn't a neighbor or my landlord. The person claimed to be from Uber Eats, but the thing is, I didn't order anything from Uber Eats that day. It made me feel a bit confused. Also, the voice sounded strange, like maybe someone playing a prank or a neighbor trying to trick me. It was a deep voice, maybe around 40 years old, and definitely sounded like a person who smokes a lot. I said, "I didn't order anything. You might have the wrong address." But a few seconds later, the knocking kept going and the same voice said, "I'm pretty sure you did. I have an order under your name." Now that made me panic. I looked around and grabbed a baseball bat, just in case he tried to break the door, because the knocking was getting louder and stronger. I checked if the door was locked, and to my horror, it wasn't. I was only 10 centimeters away from him, and my front door was the only thing keeping him from coming in. But luckily, the door didn't open from the outside without a key, even though it wasn't locked. So I took a step back and asked again, "What's the name?" He seemed to be thinking for a few seconds, and then there was another loud knock. It felt like he was really angry and frustrated. Then after a few minutes, he gave up and went down the emergency stairs next to my apartment. The steps were really loud, and it seemed like the person was in a big hurry. I wasn't sure what he wanted or what might happen if I opened the door. I still don't get how he got through the first 2 doors. Then I thought if he tried knocking on other doors before mine. So I shared the incident on our building's WhatsApp group, asking if anyone else had seen something unusual. It turns out nobody witnessed anything suspicious, and no one had opened the door for anyone else. But I'm fortunate that my instincts kicked in, warning me not to open the door. My parents had my 2 younger brothers born in 2007 and 2008, and we couldn't fit into a small 2-bedroom apartment. Plus, there was also me and my sister, who was 3 years younger than me. The first time someone tried to break in was in late August 2009. My dad was working the night shift, and my mom was in her room folding laundry while I was doing my homework. This happened when I just started middle school, and I really wanted to stay on top of my schoolwork. At the same time, my little sister, let's call her Jane, was playing with our baby brothers, AJ and Louis. It was around 9 p.m. when I heard a noise coming from the fence. It was the sound the fence makes when someone jumps over it. You should know that our fence isn't very high, just about 4 or 5 feet, so even I could easily climb over it. Back then, I thought maybe I was just imagining things, or it could have been one of the stray cats that often roam around. Jane quickly went to our shared bedroom. Our bedroom was at the back of the house, while my parents' room was at the front, next to my baby brother's room. In less than 2 minutes, I heard Jane scream really loudly, and the back door's handle was shaking like crazy. It turned out that when Jane entered the room, she heard a tapping on our window. She thought it was our mom outside, needing help with the laundry on the clothesline. When Jane opened the blinds, she saw a white man with striking green eyes looking back at her. She screamed and rushed out of the room to find my mom. That's when I heard the back door handle shaking vigorously. My mom came to us in the living room and told me to grab my brothers. Then she instructed us to hide in her room with Jane. While I was getting my brothers, my mom was on the phone with the 911 operator. We also heard someone trying to open the screen door near our back door, but we knew they probably couldn't open it because we never used it and had a big vanity blocking it. In less than 5 minutes, the police arrived, but as usual, the person who tried to break in had already left. The next time it happened was in 2013, when Jane and I were getting ready for school around 7 a.m. On that day, our school started a bit later than usual, so we were taking our time to get ready. We were the only ones at home because our parents had to start work at 7 a.m. They had dropped off my brothers and my grandparents while we were getting ready to catch the city bus to school.
Everything seemed okay until we heard the fence making that jumping over sound again. This time we had a Belgian Malinois dog named Demon, and he was already on high alert. We heard the back door handle shaking again, and my dog went wild. I hurried to open the door, and then my dog chased after the person. We couldn't see the guy very well, because when I looked out the front door, he was already running down the street. So we called our parents, and then we left for school a little later. In 2014, one of our cars was broken into during the night, but luckily they didn't steal anything. My parents usually don't leave valuable things in their cars, so the person who broke in didn't find anything worth taking. The fourth attempt happened in 2016 when my brothers, who were 9 and 8 at the time, were involved. They were sleeping in their rooms when suddenly they woke up feeling alert. They didn't know why, but they turned to the window and saw a shadowy figure of a man standing outside their window, trying to peek in and saying, "I can see you." My brothers had those curtains that aren't completely dark but not see-through either. At first they were really scared and didn't want to shout, but AJ, the older one, was frightened and wanted to scare the man away, so he threw his shoes at the window. That scared the man and he ran off. It was funny hearing my little brothers tell us this story the next morning, but it was also scary because we didn't know how long that man had been standing there. The most recent incident happened a few nights ago. I've moved out of the house since then. Jane is now 22, I'm 25, and AJ and Lewis are 15 and 14. It was around 5 p.m. when I was turning the corner to my parents' house. Our neighbors next door had their expensive truck parked in their driveway. Usually, I don't pay much attention to the neighbors, but this time, I noticed 2 men standing by the truck, looking at it. They noticed me when I pulled up to my parents' driveway. As I was getting out of the car, the 2 men left the truck and started walking toward me. At first, I thought they might be friends of our neighbors checking out the truck, but I didn't see my neighbors outside anywhere. I felt something was really suspicious because these 2 men were white, and our neighbors are Latino. I had never seen these men before, and also I had never seen our neighbors with white friends. As they often have parties, I just had a feeling these men were up to no good. They were walking so close to my car that they could almost touch me if they stretched out their hand. We made eye contact, and as I walked away, I asked them, "What's the matter with you guys?" They didn't say anything and just continued to walk slowly. When I reached the front door, my parents were there, but I asked them if our neighbors, Andre and Anna, knew that 2 men were looking at their truck. While my family was setting up dinner, my mom and I went next door to talk to our neighbors. Anna was at home with her 2 little girls and didn't notice the men near her car. She didn't hear her phone's notification from the Ring camera that detected the men. Anna told us that this was the 3rd time she had seen these men in the last 2 days. Her husband Andre works in construction and sometimes has to leave for the night shift or very early in the morning for work. So it means Anna is alone with her girls during those times. We advised Anna to be very careful, and we let her know that if anything happened. On the same night when the encounter happened with me, my siblings told me that the men came back to try to break into Anna's house. She called my parents for help. Fortunately, our neighbors from across the street were in their garage working on something, and they heard the noise. They rushed to help Anna. One of the men ran away, and the other was caught by the neighbors. They held him down until the police arrived. These men originally wanted to break into the house in the middle of the night and steal things to sell for money to support their drug habit. They had noticed Anna's truck earlier in the afternoon, so they approached the truck, thinking they could break into it instead of the house. But when I showed up and saw them, their plans didn't work out. They decided to go with their original idea and tried to break into Anna's home instead. The neighborhood has been getting worse over time, with more homes being targeted or burglarized. Even though our house was frequently a target for break-ins, we don't think it's the same people who tried to rob us several years ago. Many people in the area are getting worried about what's happening. Fortunately, in recent years, despite all these incidents at people's homes, no one has been physically hurt. My parents are moving to a smaller house after living there for 13 years. They made this choice because the new landlord said he'd increase the rent by 30%. Believe me, the house isn't worth that much, especially in this neighborhood.
When I was in grad school, I moved from my home state to a new state that was 5 hours away from my classes. But the area around the university wasn't very safe, so I thought it would be a good idea to find an apartment nearby to save money. The place I moved to was like a big house that had been changed into a 3-story building with a big 2-story part added to the back. I stayed in one of the middle apartments on the first floor and had a parking spot at the back of the building. I usually kept to myself, but I eventually met the people who lived in the apartment next to mine. They were a married couple without children, probably around 10 or 12 years older than me. I learned from the building manager that the husband was the son of the man who owned the whole place. But unfortunately, the husband had been in a serious car crash and had some long-lasting problems with thinking and understanding things. The wife was friendly, but she had a strong and talkative personality. They both seemed very eager to meet me and get to know me, which I thought was because they felt lonely at first. Later on, I started to think they might want some kind of special connection with me, and it gave off a strange feeling. They often sat outside their door, or left their screen door partially closed, so they could see me as I walked to and from my apartment to my car. Our chats could last anywhere from 5 minutes to half an hour before they realized I wanted to go on with my day. Every time they would invite me to their place for dinner and a drink, which I would kindly turn down. What made it weirder was that, even though they seemed friendly to me, I could hear them shouting at each other most nights. Sometimes it went on all night while I tried to sleep. I had to put up with this for a whole year. Just before my lease was ending in January, I found a new place to live. I got pretty good at avoiding them. But when I was moving out, husband finally caught me while I was carrying boxes. He called out, "Hey, where are you going?" I turned to face him, but I kept walking backward and said, "Oh, hi. I'm actually moving out this week." His eyes got really big and he just looked at me. Then he said, "But you never came over for dinner." I didn't really know what to say except, "Yeah, I'm sorry we never got the chance." He stood in the middle of the driveway and just kept staring at me without saying anything. So I turned around and put the box in my car. When I left the apartment complex with that stuff, I drove by him and he just kept looking at me with wide eyes and no expression. About 2 days later, I had moved all the extra things out and was only living in the apartment with my essential stuff. One night, it was incredibly cold, with temperatures going below zero. When the sun went down, all the electricity in my apartment went off. I couldn't get to my electric panel, and when I called the person in charge of the building, they didn't answer, so I had to call the electric company to tell them about the power outage and gathered my things to go stay at my girlfriend's parents' house at that time. The next morning I went back, determined to move the last of my stuff. When I saw the electric company's truck parked in front of the building, I went into my apartment. A worker came up to me and asked if I was the one who told them about the power problem. I said I was, and he laughed a little, then said, "Well, buddy, you managed to make someone angry." So I asked him what he meant, and he explained, "The only power issue in the building was in your apartment. Usually, when there's a problem, the switch is in the middle position, but your switch was turned all the way off, which means someone intentionally turned it off. The switch is in the basement storage area, but only the building manager or owner can get in there. I figured out that my neighbor had intentionally turned off my electricity on the coldest night of the year. I didn't bother talking to him about it. I just wanted to leave that place. I packed my things and left, not even checking if he or his wife were watching me go.